Hello and welcome to another round of Coffee and Contemplation. This is a segment where I relax just a little bit and I tackle more thematic issues or questions that have been brought up in the channel from time to time. I'm not going to be releasing these every day, just as time allows. It's a bit more informal. Usually when I do a review, I have a bit of a structure to it. Some bullet points and some notes that I will reference. In this case, this is just a lot more free-form, spitting out what's been on my mind. And lately, what's been on my mind is Rotted Soul Scott Daniels asked me, in reference to my review of Th'Dread Rattlin, if that was the worst movie I had ever seen, flat out, period. And I didn't want to just answer off the cuff with that one. I wanted to actually give that question some thought, and I have. For the last few days, I've been rattling that one around in my brain. I've been thinking about what makes a bad movie and what makes the worst movie. I've seen plenty of bad movies in my time. I am a horror movie lover. It's part and parcel for the course. But what makes, there's cheesy movies, you wind up with movies like Troll 2, or The Room, or, the classic, Plan 9 from Outer Space, bad movies. All around. Fantastic to watch, to make fun of. In some cases, not even that so much. You wind up with movies like Manos, The Hands of Fate. There is very little in that movie that is fun to watch, even in a group of people trying to make fun of it. To date, it is one of my favorite episodes of MST3K, but it also remains one of the tougher ones for me to watch, just because there is so little happening, especially at the beginning of the movie. There was a reason that Joel and the bots had such a hard time with it. There's definitely bad stuff out there, but what makes it go from bad to contender for the worst? And I'm reminded of a quote that I will paraphrase very poorly, I'm sure. I believe that it was from Roger Ebert, but something along, I'm gonna make a cut here while I look that up, because I don't want to do it too badly here. All right, so I'm back, and I looked it up, and the quote has been around for a long time in various iterations by various people, so I'm not going to attribute it to anybody. I'm just going to quote it as best I can. The biggest sin in cinema is to be boring. And I can't really think of a better contender, in terms of being boring, than to not have a plot, or to have as little story going on as possible. And it's difficult for me to really get around that with Th'Dread Rattlin. This was a movie that wasn't style over substance. I'm not a big fan of style over substance in general, but Th'Dread Rattlin was style in the absence of substance. That is tough to say. Regardless, there was absolutely nothing going on. There were people, characters, talking to one another periodically. It was usually just in groups of two, one character talking to another. They have 5 minutes of dialogue that may or may not have anything to do with anything at all, sometimes referencing this rattling out in the woods, and that was it. There was no substance at all, and in the lack of any substance and any plot, there was just boring, and that's how I felt about it. I was bored to tears. And it tried to make up for it by having this massive amounts of style and double exposure and quick cuts and obnoxious music. And it forgot that in the art form that is cinematic visual storytelling, that one of the biggest critical keywords in there is storytelling. If you don't have a story to tell, it doesn't matter whether you have brilliant visuals or not. It's going to be boring and then, and thus bad. So back to the original question asked by Rotted Soul Scott Daniels, is Th'Dread Rattlin the worst movie that I've ever seen? Uh, I would have to say that it would. Another way of putting that in my mind is it the most boring movie I've ever seen? And I have a few contenders on that one. I wasn't that impressed with Jerry, which was a movie that one of my coworkers at my real job introduced me to as see if you can make it through this one. I don't think I found it to be necessarily as terrible as he did, but it was still pretty darn boring. Monos, The Hands of Fate definitely got boring, especially at the beginning, but I think that you did wind up with having actual characters, having an actual plot, having an actual storyline. As ridiculous as it was, it did have it. So I can't really think of a movie that had less storytelling impact, that had a more boring element to it than Th'Dread Rattlin. So I'm not going to say that it is the worst movie in all of cinematic history, but I haven't seen every movie in all of cinematic history. And on that note, I would have to say that Th'Dread Rattlin is not just a terrible horror movie. Yes, Scott Daniels, that I believe is the worst movie I have ever seen. I would take a bad plot over no plot any day of the week. And that's how I get to my conclusion. Maybe at some point I'll watch another one. I have been holding off on watching Besetment and a few others along those lines just because I know that those are mostly silent, visual, one visual after another kind of movies. And, I don't know if I'm going to be able to tackle that on a critical level, terribly well, but, at some point I will, and I'll at least give it my best shot, and we'll see what I come away with. But to date, as of November 27th, the date of this recording, and I believe release, Th'Dread Rattlin is the worst movie I've ever seen. So if you have a contender for me to look at, if you want to up the ante and show, or suggest a title that would be in contention for you as the worst movie you've ever seen, I would welcome you to leave that in the comments below. Otherwise, thank you for joining me on this episode of Coffee and Contemplation. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at the next Rotted Review. Thank you.